In a modest suburban home in Anytown, USA, retired Army Sergeant John Carter sat surrounded by mementos of his military career. Medals, photographs, and folded flags adorned the walls, silent witnesses to a life of service. But now, at 45, John felt more alone than ever. His laptop screen glowed with yet another rejection email. "We're looking for someone with more relevant experience." John's mind drifted to his time in Afghanistan, the scorching heat, the weight of his gear, the camaraderie that kept them going through the toughest times. He could almost hear the staccato of gunfire and the shouts of his fellow soldiers. Back then, he was valued, respected. Now, in the civilian world, he felt invisible. A knock at the door jolted John from his reverie. Opening it, he was surprised to see familiar faces. Captain Sarah Thompson, Lieutenant Mike Rodriguez, and Corporal Tom Wilson, his old unit members. Their smiles were warm, but concern shadowed their eyes. "John, we've been trying to reach you," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "We're worried about you," Tom chimed in. "We're having a get-together at O'Malley's. Why don't you join us?" John hesitated, the thought of socializing feeling almost painful. But something in Mike's encouraging nod made him reconsider. "All right," he said finally, grabbing his jacket. "But just for a little while." As they walked to Sarah's car, John felt a small spark of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Connection. Maybe, just maybe, this was a step in the right direction. The familiar smell of beer and nachos greeted them as they entered O'Malley's. In a corner booth, their small group settled in, the clink of glasses and murmur of conversation creating a comforting ambiance. Tom, now working as a mechanic, shared his own struggles. "It took me months to find this job," he admitted, his usually jovial face serious. "Every interview felt like I was speaking a different language. They couldn't see how my skills translated to civilian work." John nodded, a lump forming in his throat. It was a relief to know he wasn't alone in his struggles. Sarah, who had transitioned more smoothly into a corporate role, leaned forward, her eyes bright with an idea. "What if we organized an event, something to bridge the gap between veterans and employers? We could call it Veterans Connect." The table fell silent as they considered her words. Mike was the first to speak up. "That's brilliant, Sarah. We could showcase our skills. Help employers understand what we bring to the table." John listened, a mix of hope and skepticism swirling in his chest. "I don't know," he said hesitantly. "Who would even come to something like that?" "More people than you think," Tom replied, clapping John on the shoulder. "There are a lot of vets out there feeling just like you do, and plenty of companies that would jump at the chance to hire skilled, disciplined workers, if they just understood what we offer." As the conversation flowed, John felt something shift inside him. The stories of his friends, their resilience in the face of adversity, began to chip away at his wall of despair. By the time they left O'Malley's, the seed of an idea had taken root. "All count me in," John said as they stood outside the bar. "Let's make this Veterans Connect thing happen." The smiles that greeted his words were like beacons in the night, guiding John towards a future that suddenly seemed a little brighter. In the weeks that followed, John's living room became the unofficial headquarters for Veterans Connect. Maps and charts replaced the dusty mementos on his walls, and the air buzzed with energy and purpose. Mike, drawing on his experience as a combat medic, proposed a series of mental health workshops. "We need to address the invisible wounds," he explained, his voice soft but determined. "Many of us are battling depression, anxiety, PTSD. We can't ignore that." Sarah nodded, adding, "And we need to focus on rebuilding self-esteem. Too many of us feel worthless in the civilian world. We need to remind ourselves, and potential employers, of our value." As they planned, John felt a fire rekindling inside him. He found himself making calls, reaching out to local businesses and veteran organizations. Each small victory, a promised donation, a commitment to attend, fueled his growing sense of purpose. Tom took charge of the logistics, his mechanical mind perfectly suited to solving the puzzle of venue selection and event flow. "It's just like planning a mission," he joked, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. One evening, as they were wrapping up a planning session, John looked around at his friends, at the determination in Sarah's eyes, the compassion in Mike's smile, the enthusiasm radiating from Tom. He realized that in helping others, he was also helping himself. "You know," John said, his voice thick with emotion, "a month ago, I could barely get out of bed. Now look at us. We're not just planning an event, we're changing lives." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Then Sarah raised her coffee mug in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said. As their mugs clinked together, John felt a surge of hope. The road ahead might be challenging, but with his unit by his side, he was ready to face whatever came their way. As the day of the event drew nearer, the team faced a new set of challenges. Finding a suitable venue proved more difficult than expected, and securing partnerships with local businesses was an uphill battle. One particularly frustrating afternoon, they met with Mr. Thompson, a prominent local businessman. His skepticism was palpable as he leaned back in his plush office chair. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," Mr. Thompson said, his tone condescending. "But how can I be sure these veterans can handle the pressures of the corporate world? It's quite different from the military, you know." The room tensed. Sarah's jaw clenched. Mike's eyes flashed with anger, and Tom looked ready to leap across the desk. But it was John who surprised everyone by standing up, his voice calm but powerful. "Mr. Thompson," he began, "in the military, we learned to adapt to ever-changing high-stress situations. We've managed million-dollar equipment, led diverse teams, and made split-second decisions with lives on the line. We've developed skills in logistics, technology, and communication that rival any corporate training program." John paused, meeting Mr. Thompson's gaze steadily. "We're not asking for handouts. We're offering you dedicated, disciplined employees who understand the importance of teamwork and mission accomplishment. The question isn't whether we can handle the corporate world, sir. It's whether the corporate world is ready to benefit from our experience." As John finished, the room fell silent. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Well," he said, a smile tugging at his lips, "it seems I have some rethinking to do. Count me in for your event, Sergeant Carter. I look forward to meeting more veterans like yourself." As they left the office, buoyed by their unexpected victory, Sarah squeezed John's shoulder. "That was incredible," she said. "You just changed the game." John smiled, feeling a confidence he hadn't experienced in years. They had won this battle, but the war for acceptance and understanding was far from over. Yet for the first time in a long time, John felt ready for the fight. The morning of Veterans Connect dawned bright and clear. The community center buzzed with activity as veterans in crisp uniforms and polished shoes arrived, a mix of nervousness and determination on their faces. John stood at the entrance, greeting each arrival with a firm handshake and a word of encouragement. He marveled at the diversity before him, young and old, men and women, representing every branch of the military. Each face told a story of service, sacrifice, and the struggle to find purpose in civilian life. As the event began, John took the stage, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Welcome, fellow veterans, employers, and community members," he began. "Today, we're not just here to find jobs, we're here to bridge worlds, to show that the skills we honed in service to our country are invaluable in civilian life." John shared his own journey, the despair he'd felt, the rejections he'd faced, and the renewal of purpose he'd found in organizing this event. As he spoke, he saw heads nodding, eyes glistening with unshed tears. His words were touching a chord, giving voice to experiences many had struggled to articulate. "We've faced enemies abroad," John concluded, his voice ringing with passion. "Now we face a different kind of battle, against misunderstanding, against prejudice, against our own doubts. But just as we did in uniform, we'll face this challenge together. We are not broken. We are battle-tested. We are not liabilities. We are assets. And today, we prove that to the world and to ourselves. As applause filled the room, John saw something powerful happening. Veterans who had arrived looking uncertain were now standing taller, their eyes bright with renewed confidence. Employers who had seemed skeptical were now eagerly engaging in conversations, seeing beyond the uniform to the wealth of experience each veteran offered. The air crackled with energy as stories were shared, connections were made, and barriers began to crumble. John realized that they had created more than just an event. They had sparked a movement. And in doing so, they had taken the first step towards reclaiming their place in a world that had too often overlooked their value. As the day progressed, Mike's mental health workshop became a focal point of the event. In a quiet corner of the community center, veterans gathered in a circle, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken struggles and shared understanding. Mike began softly, his usual joviality replaced by a gentle seriousness. "We've all faced battles," he said, "but some of the toughest ones happen right here." He tapped his temple. "It's okay to not be okay. What's not okay is facing these battles alone." One by one, veterans began to open up. A young woman spoke of nightmares that left her gasping for air. An older man admitted to the guilt he carried for surviving when others didn't. Each story was met with nods of recognition and murmurs of support. John, sitting quietly at the edge of the circle, felt a lump form in his throat. He had always prided himself on being strong, on not needing help. But listening to his comrades, he realized that true strength lay in vulnerability, in reaching out. Hesitantly, John raised his hand. I've been struggling," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some days, it feels like the war never ended, like I'm still fighting, but I don't know what for anymore." The room fell silent, all eyes on John. Then, slowly, hands reached out, a pat on the back, a squeeze of the shoulder, small gestures that spoke volumes. "You're not alone, brother," someone said. "We've got your six." As the workshop continued, John felt something shift inside him. The weight he had been carrying for so long began to lighten. He wasn't magically cured. But for the first time in years, he felt hope. Real, tangible hope. Meanwhile, across the hall, Sarah was leading a session on translating military skills to civilian resumes. Veterans who had arrived with slumped shoulders and downcast eyes were now standing tall, engaging confidently with potential employers. They were rediscovering their worth, their purpose. In helping others, John realized they had all taken a crucial step in their own healing journeys. The battle was far from over, but they were no longer fighting alone. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the community center windows, the energy of the event reached its peak. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the unmistakable sound of connections being forged. John found himself in a deep discussion with the CEO of a local tech startup. The woman's eyes sparkled with interest as John explained how his experience coordinating battlefield communications could translate to project management. "You know," she said, leaning in, "we've been looking for someone with precisely your skill set. How would you feel about coming in for a formal interview next week?" John's heart leapt. For the first time in months, he felt a genuine sense of excitement about his future. "I'd be honored," he replied, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. Across the room, Tom was beaming as he shook hands with a representative from a major automotive company. Sarah was surrounded by a group of veterans, all eagerly taking notes as she offered career advice. Mike sat with a small group, providing quiet words of encouragement to those still struggling. As the event wound down, the team gathered in a quiet corner, their faces flushed with exhaustion and triumph. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "We really did it." Tom nodded, his usual joviality tempered by emotion. "It's more than that," he said. "We've started something here. Something big." Just then, an elderly veteran approached their group. His weathered face bore the marks of years of struggle, but his eyes shone with a renewed light. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. John felt a profound sense of purpose wash over him. They had set out to help others, but in the process, they had all found healing. They had rediscovered the strength that comes from unity, from shared purpose. The day's success wasn't measured just in job offers or networking connections. It was measured in renewed spirits, in rekindled hope, in the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. As John looked at his friends, his unit, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new mission, one that would change lives for years to come. Found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. A local news station ran a feature on the event, showcasing the powerful stories of veterans who had found new purpose and direction. The segment went viral on social media, touching hearts far beyond their small town. One morning, as John sipped his coffee and scrolled through his phone, he was stunned to see a video from the event trending nationwide. Comments poured in from across the country, veterans sharing their own struggles, civilians expressing newfound appreciation for the challenges faced by those who had served. "Can you believe this?" John said to Sarah over the phone, his voice filled with awe. "We're trending!" Sarah's laugh crackled through the speaker. "Believe it, John. You've started a movement." The community rallied around the success of Veterans Connect. Local businesses that had been hesitant to participate were now reaching out, eager to be involved in future events. The mayor's office called, proposing to make it an annual occurrence. John found himself busier than ever, but it was a different kind of busy than his military days. This was purposeful, fulfilling work. He was making a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of countless others. One afternoon, as he prepared for a speaking engagement at a local high school, John paused to reflect on how far he'd come. Just months ago, he had been lost, feeling like a relic of a past life. Now, he stood tall, confident in his value and his ability to contribute to society. As he straightened his tie and headed out the door, John smiled to himself. The battle wasn't over. There would always be challenges to face, stereotypes to overcome. But now, he had a new mission, a new purpose. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. He had an army of veterans and supporters beside him, ready to change the world, one connection at a time. As autumn leaves began to turn, John found himself busier than ever. The success of Veterans Connect had opened doors he never imagined possible. He was no longer just looking for a job. He had become a voice for veterans across the nation. One crisp morning, John stood before a classroom full of high school students, their young faces a mix of curiosity and respect. "When I left the military," he began, "I thought my days of making a difference were over. I couldn't have been more wrong." As autumn leaves began to turn, John found himself busier than ever. The success of Veterans Connect had opened doors he never imagined possible. He was no longer just looking for a job. He had become a voice for veterans across the nation. One crisp morning, John stood before a classroom full of high school students, their young faces a mix of curiosity and respect. "When I left the military," he began, "I thought my days of making a difference were over. I couldn't have been more wrong." He shared his journey, the struggles, the moments of despair, and the turning point that came when he reconnected with his unit. As he spoke, John saw the students lean in, their eyes widening with understanding. "The skills you learn in the military, leadership, teamwork, adaptability, they're invaluable in civilian life," John explained. "But sometimes, it takes a community to help you see that." After the talk, a young girl approached him, her eyes bright with determination. "My dad's a vet," she said. "He's been struggling. I want to help him like you helped others." John knelt down to her level, his heart swelling with emotion. "The first step is to let him know he's not alone," he said gently. "Sometimes, that's all it takes to start healing." As John left the school, his phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Emergency meeting tonight. Big news." That evening, the old unit gathered at O'Malley's, just like they had months ago when this journey began. But this time, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Sarah could barely contain her excitement as she shared the news. "We've been approached by a national veterans organization. They want to implement Veterans Connect programs across the country. They want us to lead the charge. The table erupted in cheers and congratulations. As the excitement settled, John looked around at his friends, his family. They had started this journey to help themselves, but it had grown into something far bigger. "What do you say, team?" John asked, raising his glass. "Ready for a new mission?" The resounding "hurrah" that followed was all the answer he needed. A year had passed since the first Veterans Connect event, and the change in John's life was profound. He stood at the podium of the grand ballroom, looking out at a sea of faces, veterans, employers, community leaders, all gathered for the national launch of the Veterans Connect initiative. "A year ago," John began, his voice strong and clear, "I was lost. I felt like my best days were behind me, that I had nothing left to offer. I know many of you have felt the same." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, connecting with each person. "But look at us now. We've turned our struggles into strength." He saw the transformation in his fellow veterans, the straightened postures, the confident smiles. They were no longer just survivors. They were leaders, mentors, valuable members of their communities. He introduced Sarah, now heading the National Training Program, teaching other veterans how to organize their own Veterans Connect events. Mike stepped up next, discussing the mental health initiative that had grown from his workshop, now offering support to thousands of veterans across the country. Tom, grinning ear to ear, shared the success of the job placement program. "In the past year," he announced proudly, "we've helped over 5,000 veterans find meaningful employment, and we're just getting started." As the presentations continued, John felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Mr. Thompson, the businessman who had once doubted them. "I was wrong about you," Mr. Thompson said, extending his hand. "You've not only proven your worth, you've enriched our entire community. Thank you for your service, both in uniform and out." The event concluded with a standing ovation, the room filled with the energy of hope and new beginnings. As John looked out at the crowd, at the lives they had touched, the changes they had made, he felt a sense of fulfillment that surpassed anything he had experienced before. Later that evening, John's old unit gathered in a quiet corner of the ballroom. They raised their glasses in a toast, not just to their success, but to the journey that had brought them here. "To new missions," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "To second chances," Sarah added. "To the battles we've fought," Mike chimed in. "And to the ones we've yet to face," Tom concluded. As their glasses clinked together, John knew that while their military service had ended, their mission to serve had taken on a new form. They had found their purpose, their place in the civilian world, and in doing so, they had paved the way for countless others to do the same. The night wind carried the sound of laughter and conversation as veterans, old and young, shared stories and dreams. And in that moment, John realized that they had come full circle. They had not just reconnected with each other. They had reconnected with their strength, their purpose, and their ability to make a difference. As the stars twinkled above, John smiled. The future was bright, full of possibilities, and this time, they were ready, not just to face it, but to shape it, together.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.